Let us pray. Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we, thine unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thine heavenly wisdom from above to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interest, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public will, peace, and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and the state within the same, in true Christian love and charity one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the sweet fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all forevermore. Amen. Announcements. I am in receipt of apologies from the Honorable Member for Meekwood North, and Minister for Education, Innovation, Gender Relations, and Sustainable Development, informing that she will be with us later today because she has an emergency. I am also in receipt of an apology from the Honorable Member for Labrie, informing that if at all he joins us today, it will be very late in the afternoon. For my part, I have an announcement, and it grieves me that I have to speak to that. And that is that this House, it was the understanding, and all members, all honorable members of this House, know that we were to commence today's proceedings at 9 o'clock. It is sad that the leaders of this country can commence a parliamentary proceeding that is supposed to start at 9 in the morning at 10:15 because I guess they have not seen the importance or does not place sufficient importance to the business of the people and the Parliament of St. Lucia to be here on time. The majority of us left here at the same time yesterday evening, and it does not augur well, and it says very little to the future leaders of tomorrow and the people, the young people in particular, who are watching this broadcast live, to see that there are so many empty seats, and I have to wait until 10:15 for a quorum, and we just barely have a quorum at 10:15. It does not speak very well at all. The business of the Parliament of St. Lucia and the people of St. Lucia is important, and members ought to understand that they should place sufficient importance on that. We shall move on. When the House last rose, the question before it was that the Appropriation 2017-2018 bill be read a second time. I recognize the mic of the Honorable Member for Swazel Saltibus, Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister with responsibility for commerce, industry, investment, enterprise development, and consumer affairs.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as you will recognize from the last debate, I would like to make it a habit whenever I'm making such presentations to the House that the first thing I do is to give thanks to the Almighty for raising me up this morning, for giving me sufficient strength and health to be here today to make my presentation. I would also like to give thanks to my family and my support network for the energy that they bring to me on a daily basis. And most of all, Madam Speaker, to give thanks to the people of Swazel Saltibus who are responsible for me being in this honorable House today. I would also want to recognize people from my community in the sitting dock as well, Madam Speaker, and I thank them for coming to provide me with the support that is needed. Madam Speaker, being a first-time parliamentarian and this being my first presentation on the Appropriation Bill, with your permission, I would also like to add to my prayers this morning with a little quote that a friend of mine sent to me. I think it's needed to provide me with the guidance and the enlightenment in making my delivery this morning. I speak to your life this morning that you will go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth before you into singing, and all the fields shall clap their hands. Isaiah 55:12. Good morning and have a blessed day. For the records, Madam Speaker, as I have always done in my professional life and as I continue as a parliamentary representative, I wish to state to St. Lucia that I was on time for the proceedings this morning. In fact, I was the first one here this morning, actually rushing because I really thought I was late. So I want to set that record straight, Madam Speaker. I would like to begin my presentation this morning, Madam Speaker, with a quote. A quote from a great warrior called Sun Tzu. And the quote goes like this, Madam Speaker. Victorious warriors win first, and then they go to war. Defeated warriors go to war first, and then they seek to win. Madam Speaker, June 6 saw the St. Lucians giving this party a majority outlook on the elections, which meant that we won the general elections. The war that we are now going into, Madam Speaker, is a war to fight against the inequality, a war to fight against the injustice, and a war to fight against, Madam Speaker, putting our people first and empowering our people to go forward. The war that is being fought on the opposite side today, Madam Speaker, is a war of words and a war of repetitiveness, Madam Speaker, and a war to try to create panic among our people. And this, Madam Speaker, we must put to rest. 2 weeks ago, Madam Speaker, while debating the estimates of expenditure, I focused primarily on my ministry. And I must thank the Leader of the Opposition then, who brought to my attention certain rules of Parliament that should have been observed. And as a new parliamentarian, I'm thankful for all guidance that I can receive. But at that point in my presentation, Madam Speaker, I also indicated that I would leave to this debate what the Appropriation Bill had for my community, Choiseul Saltibus. So today I will be focusing quite a bit on the benefits that this Appropriation Bill will be bringing to the people of Choiseul Saltibus. But, Madam Speaker, it is necessary that I speak on a couple of issues that have been raised since 2 weeks ago. I have heard from the opposite side, Madam Speaker, reference to this budget as a bad budget. You know, and I reflected on that, and it reminded me many years ago when I was working in the community of Soufrière. There was a group of young men called Bad Company. And quite a few of my friends belonged to that group. But then I got to know quite a bit of the people belonging to that group. And then I asked the question, why are so many upright citizens belonging to a group called Bad Company? And they said to me that BAD is just an acronym. And I think the leader of the opposition will be very familiar with acronyms, because quite a few of them, you know, were created under the last administration. And he told me BAD means bold, ambitious, and daring. And so, Madam Speaker, this bold, ambitious, and daring budget that has been put forth by my Prime Minister, I want to applaud, because I believe it is the way out of the sinking fiasco that we have in front of us. Madam Speaker, I also want to set the records right on what has been pronounced as, particularly from my ministry, the removal of the subsidy on rice and sugar. Madam Speaker, I'm getting to understand politics, and I understand it is sometimes necessary to gain favor from the people who are following you, or from the people you believe are most vulnerable, to make them believe that the government is not in their favor. And so I have heard, Madam Speaker, talk that this government is so uncaring that we have removed the $4 million subsidy, which means, Madam Speaker, in the words of members on the other side, that the cost of rice and sugar will be going up. This is such a disingenuous statement, Madam Speaker, and it is such a misleading statement. And I wish this morning to clarify once and for all what it means by removing the $4 million allowance that was usually repeated in my ministry's budget. Madam Speaker, a subsidy is when a government decides to put money into the product because of the cost of the product, to alleviate the cost so that it will cost St. Lucians less. That is what a subsidy is. And so, Madam Speaker, over the years, what has been happening is government has been putting an allowance into the budget. In the event that these products rise, then we will offset this increase in cost so that St. Lucians will not have to pay more. The cost of rice and sugar has been decreasing on the world market, and it is unnecessary, Madam Speaker, to put an allowance of $4 million because it's just going to increase and inflate your budget. Why do that, Madam Speaker? So it was not necessary to include a $4 million allowance because we recognize the possibilities of rice and sugar raising on the market it was not going to happen. And in the event, just in the event, Madam Speaker, there happens to be a spike because of the performance, Madam Speaker, of the government supply warehouse, there will be adequate room, Madam Speaker, to take care of any increase. And so when the Prime Minister spoke about revisiting the operations of the supply warehouse, it did not mean that we are going to close down the government warehouse. We are not going to close down. We have to revisit the operations of the various operations of government to ensure that they're working at full capacity, Madam Speaker, and that St. Lucians are getting value for their tax monies, Madam Speaker. That is what it is. So by saying we're going to review it has nothing. The Prime Minister was very clear when he said the Marketing Board, Radio St. Lucia, Fish Association, he never said, Madam Speaker, that he was going to close down the operations at the government supply warehouse. So we have to be very careful, Madam Speaker, when we speak to the people out there. I heard the leader of the opposition yesterday indicated that what the Prime Minister should have said was that this is the situation that we face, and as a result of the situation that we face, this is what we are doing in this budget. But that is exactly what the Prime Minister has said in every aspect of the budget, that this is the situation. He did not use the exact words, but this is exactly what he said. This is the situation, and this is why we have to do A, B, and C. So, Madam Speaker, you know, there's a saying that we have short memories, but I want to contest that, Madam. I don't think St. Lucians have short memories, Madam Speaker. Okay, and I believe, you know, the comedy that is sometimes played out in this House, Madam Speaker, is something that the St. Lucians have grown tired of, Madam Speaker, and St. Lucians would like to see an elevated budget debate, an elevated discussion in this House, Madam Speaker. And this is one of the reasons why, Madam Speaker, why I plan to make a difference in how I behave in this honorable House. Madam Speaker, the other situation that I wish to speak about before going into my presentation is the issue of the increased duty on gas. Madam Speaker, you know, I remember one evening I left office rather late, and I was going down to Choiseul. I passed through the Millennium Highway, and Madam Speaker, I must admit, I was going above 50. And Madam Speaker, I went into this hole. Madam Speaker, I never knew I could curse so much. Oh, yes? I was livid. I cursed the government. I cursed everybody, and then I realized I was cursing my government. But that is the point I want to make here, Madam Speaker, that St. Lucians not necessarily concerned about the government, but what they're concerned about is that we are doing things to alleviate the high cost of living, Madam Speaker, alleviate the burdens and the hardships they're going through. Because when St. Lucians and the people who traverse our roads have to deal with the terrible conditions of the road, Madam Speaker, cost of parts, cost of tires, your bottom pan, I'm sure the Honorable Guy Joseph, who's more familiar with vehicles, would speak to some of the expenses that you have to go through when you have to maneuver some of them roads, Madam Speaker. You know, I remember the song by Fontaine Beaufort, Tupa ici, Tupa là, get away, sir. That is what we have to be facing, Madam Speaker. And so, Madam Speaker, the Honorable Leader said one thing we all agree on, and that is we have too much debt. And I agree with him. We have too much debt. All of us agree we have too much debt. And that is why, Madam Speaker, we cannot continue to borrow to fix roads. We cannot continue to fix roads, Madam Speaker. We must get, Madam Speaker, a stream of income that will create less of a burden to government to be able to maintain the roads. And that is the thinking behind that, Madam Speaker. Because this 150, Madam Speaker, when you juxtapose this 150 to the cost of the parts that our bus drivers and our daily computers on this road have to face because of maneuvering holes, falling into holes, and everything else, Madam Speaker, that 150 is a pinch. So when you make that comparison, Madam Speaker, In fact, there is no comparison, Madam Speaker, because we are very familiar with the high cost of vehicular parts. Madam Speaker, leading up to the 2016 election, and after convincingly winning my seat, thank you. One of the questions I found myself being asked very often was, why did you go into politics? Why did you decide to go into politics? A man like you that has such a free spirit, who's not known to be aligned to any political party, well, except in 2006, Madam Speaker, when I openly supported my cousin. We all know that story, okay? Madam Speaker, I will confess today that I have always been very wary and concerned of how politicians behave and how politics, even more so in recent times, have divided our people. Madam Speaker, I don't want you to get me wrong, because there will always be sides, and we must always respect, Madam Speaker, the rights and opinions of people. But that is the divide that is spelled D-I-V-I-D-E. The divide I'm speaking about today, Madam Speaker, is the divide that is spelled H-A-T-E. Madam Speaker, so steep was I in the belief that politics create that divide, Madam Speaker. My friends will tell you that whenever I had any social activity at my home, I actually had a banner in the door, which you had to see when you enter, which said, no religion, no politics, which meant you should not be discussing any of these things, because these things normally, Madam Speaker, lead to people raising voices and creating barriers. But Madam Speaker, back to the question, why did I go into politics? Well, Madam Speaker, apart from the fact that several people had the confidence that I would represent the best interests of the community of Choiseul Saltibus, and that I did not have an ulterior motive, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I felt I could be different. I felt I could create a difference. And I'm sure right now, the people who are watching will say, oh, he's so naive. In fact, I'm sure some of my people around this table are saying, oh, just wait. But you see, Madam Speaker, this is the difference. I don't see the position that I have been given, Madam Speaker, to represent the people of Choiseul Saltibus as an entitlement. Madam Speaker, I know what it is to work hard. I've always worked very hard. And I continue to take the work that I have been given to run the Ministry of Commerce very seriously, Madam Speaker. I work very hard, Madam Speaker. I come to work before 8 on most days. Times when I don't come is because most probably I have a meeting somewhere, and it means I'm still at work. Okay, Madam Speaker. And as I've said before, the ministry staff, they say, ministers don't come to work so early. But it is my discipline, Madam Speaker. It is my discipline. But Madam Speaker, the thing is, I firmly believe that while there are hacks on the other side of the divide, the majority of St. Lucians want to see a difference. Madam Speaker, I have a challenge ahead of me. And the challenge, Madam Speaker, is to prove that not all politicians are bobolis and violet and all the other negatives that's associated, with being a politician. In fact, Madam Speaker, the leader of the opposition will tell you that I approached him some parliamentary sessions ago, and I said to him, you guys are your greatest enemies. And I was referring to all politicians. Because I said to him, this is hard work. This is hard work. And we should build each other up, Madam Speaker. We should build each other up. But Madam Speaker, I understand. I can understand, Madam Speaker, why some people behave the way they do because, Madam Speaker, over time, there have been so many cruel and vicious attacks on people in this House, Madam Speaker, and politicians, as a result of trying to satisfy their egos and satisfy the hacks, continue to behave a certain way, and that's stifling the progress, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I want to see a difference. Madam Speaker, I don't know how this House is governed, but if there is ever a chance to change the standing orders, Madam Speaker, I would like that we ban the word victimization. Madam Speaker, that word has become so overused by whichever party that is in opposition. It has lost its character. I know, Madam Speaker, what it means, because I was a casualty as soon as my name began circulating as a possible candidate. And some members, I wish they were there today, on the opposite side, would be very familiar with what I'm referring to. And maybe, Madam Speaker, I should be here spewing hate and have a vengeful agenda. But that is not my character, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I live by the words, you can't keep a good man down. If you get a chance, Madam Speaker, you can listen to the song by Sizzler, Solid as a Rock. You can't keep a good man down. And if you want to continue listening to music, Madam Speaker, you can listen to Papa Veda, what's there for a man is there for a man. So regardless of what has been done to me or what has been tried to be done to me, Madam Speaker, I will maintain who I am. I will always be who I am, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have heard members opposite speak that we are not giving the opportunity to people we thought did not support us work. That is such an unfair statement, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I came under so much pressure from some of my own supporters because I directed that when work was being distributed, it should just not accommodate supporters, but people who most needed it. But Madam Speaker, that's the division politics has created in this country. When you give people who truly deserve opportunities, your supporters get upset. That is the kind of division and the thinking that has been created. And you know what, Madam Speaker? That is only as a result of the hatred that is spewed out at political rallies and this kind of things, Madam. We have to stop that, Madam Speaker. Neighbors throw words at each other, you know, and the community togetherness gets eroded and social decay is fueled, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, with your permission, allow me to share a lighter side of this House. Madam Speaker, at the last stimulus package where we were providing works to the various communities, I told one of the leaders of the communities the very thing that I say there. Ensure that the people you give work, Madam Speaker, are the people who are vulnerable and need, not necessarily supporters. Madam Speaker, one of my supporters met me. And Madam Speaker, this is what she said. Mr. Bradley, you mean to tell me you'll give so and so down the road work, Mr. Bradley? Mr. Bradley, these people don't support you, you know, Mr. Bradley. Mr. Bradley, these people have a dog and they call the dog Bradley. You think that would get me vexed, Madam Speaker? You know what my response was? I am sure she's very happy that the dog is taking care of her now. That's a bodyguard. Madam Speaker, I could keep going on with such stories, but I know you've got my message. Madam Speaker, one of the sad realities that continue to remain at the forefront of my mind is the number of households in my community with young people who are unemployed. Yeah. What is more depressing, Madam Speaker, is that these young people All their lives they were told, go to school, get an education, so when you leave school, you will get work. Madam Speaker, you will realize I try to refer to a number of songs so that you can get a clearer picture of because you know our people are full of rhythm, and you may not recognize, Madam Speaker. I'm sure you have recognized that people pick up songs a lot faster than they pick up teaching in a classroom. Because rhythm, Madam Speaker, you know, our natural makeup is rhythm, and we learn things that have rhythm. But Madam Speaker, I'm sure you're so familiar with the song Untold Stories by Ojo Labs. It speaks to the youth being full of education, but they're not on a payroll. It also says, Madam Speaker, what is to prevent these youth from getting out of control? Yesterday I heard the Honourable Member for Castries Central indicate, and while the document that she was quoting from was a dated one, but it did indicate, Madam Speaker, that St. Lucia has the highest youth unemployment. And that is why, Madam Speaker, I applaud the initiatives taken by this government to not only create significant opportunities for employment, but to provide the requisite training, Madam Speaker, to make our younger people more marketable. And I applaud the National Apprentice Program, Madam Speaker. The future that we are attracting, Madam Speaker, will create the environment for our people to become more entrepreneurial in nature, Madam Speaker. The civil service cannot continue to be giving jobs. People must learn to create their own jobs and to employ other people, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you know, most times people vote for change. But change is not easy, Madam Speaker. We need to be able to be strong, to roll with the blows and stick to the plan. And that is what our Prime Minister is all about. Stick to the plan and execute. Let them talk. At the end of the day, the results will show. Stick to the plan, execute, 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 Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we all recognize that change is necessary. And if I ask, is change necessary in this room, everybody will put up their hand, Madam Speaker. But if I ask the same question, who is willing to change, you might not get the same result, Madam Speaker. This government, Madam Speaker, recognizing what has to be done, we recognize that we have to change the thinking that we have always had to save this country and to provide the kind of employment for our young people, Madam Speaker. Change, Madam Speaker, cannot be external. It must come from within. Madam Speaker, this government is placing a lot of emphasis on the south of the island. And Madam Speaker, I must say that in the past, a lot of lip service has been paid to the south of the island. We, Madam Speaker, are determined as a government to change the destiny. Incidentally, Destiny is another song by Ojo Labs, Madam Speaker. We are determined to change the destiny of the people from Canaries all the way to Dennery in that western, southern, eastern belt, Madam Speaker, because of the emphasis on changing the characteristic of the South. Madam Speaker, the people that I represent shows El Saltibus. Either way you look at it, if they have to go to the city, and I refer to Castries, Madam Speaker, they have to pay $5 to go to Vieux Fort, and then $8 to go to Castries. Do the math, Madam Speaker, both ways. At the end of the day, Madam Speaker, it costs them $520 a month in transportation. Somebody will say, well, ask them to rent. Madam Speaker, to rent any decent place in the city, Madam Speaker, will cost upward of $700, $800, Madam Speaker. Far less if you have to get it rented. And you have to think of utilities, you have to think of furnishing, you have to think of everything else, Madam Speaker. That is why, Madam Speaker, recognizing the number of people, young people, in the community who are not working. And it's not because these people are not marketable, Madam Speaker. They have the subjects, they have the skills, Madam Speaker, but there's nothing in the south for them. And it does not make any sense to go up north. What you working for? There's a saying, people who can say it, lave la main ou souiller à terre, Madam Speaker. Yes, that's what it is. Makes no sense, Madam Speaker. But there's something I've realized, Madam Speaker, and that parties in opposition are always experts. Once you're in opposition, you're an expert. But once you get into government, you always get an obstacle to development. And I recognize, Madam Speaker, that the members opposite all of a sudden are experts on everything, Madam Speaker. They are in opposition and it looks like they want to set the agenda for the party in power. We won, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let the people judge our performance. Let the people judge our performance. Let the people judge our performance. Madam Speaker, through you, I would like to tell them you had your opportunity and only very few benefited. Very few benefited. We need to stop our people from begging politicians, Madam Speaker. We need to stop our people from begging politicians for favors. We need to empower our people, Madam Speaker. That's right. We must ensure our people create their own destiny. Madam Speaker, let me tell you the difference that I bring to this House, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me tell you the difference that I bring to this House. I am not afraid of what is known as political suicide. I will do and I will support what I believe is best for this country and the people of this country. They may not see it today, Madam Speaker, but somewhere down the road, they will recognize the decision that was made was in their best interest, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we seek to ensure that the investments we entertain bring sustainable opportunities for our people. And Madam Speaker, I'm very happy that Choiseul Saltibus is finally getting its fair share of attention. And I know we will receive more. And I can assure the people of my chosen place that we have only just begun. As we speak, Madam Speaker, construction has begun on the Domain Banabush project. 2 of the foundations have been completed for the over 20 villas, and currently 45 people are employed. More employment is expected as additional villas are constructed. Subsequently, Madam Speaker, there will be dedicated staff to the resort. Madam Speaker, I am on record as saying that as long as a project will benefit the people of my community, I will support it. Regardless of who wants to take the credit, Madam Speaker. Regardless. And I speak specifically, Madam Speaker, to the Sunset Bay Hotel project at Choiseul, Sabusha Choiseul. Madam Speaker, in January 2016, the land was sold to the developers. And during the campaign to the elections, Madam Speaker, we heard about a project. We even heard about a date for groundbreaking. But unfortunately, Madam, nothing happened. Madam Speaker, I want to say something which might surprise many, especially members on my side. But I believe the last parliamentary representative for Choiseul Saltibus, he had good intentions. However, Madam Speaker, he did not get the support from his Prime Minister and leader. That is the difference with this side, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I will reflect the lack of support and I will speak to them as they come up. Anyway, Madam Speaker, after the general election, I approached the developers to get a full appreciation, Madam Speaker, of what was being negotiated. Madam Speaker, I felt the project was a worthwhile project, and I gave it my full support. Madam Speaker, you would believe that since this project was conceptualized under the previous administration, that it would be smooth sailing, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, and that's another reason, Madam Speaker, I recognize that people who have political agendas try to stifle development. Madam Speaker, we cannot be serious about development when there are some people who their professionalism second. Just, Madam Speaker, to satisfy selfish political agendas. Madam Speaker, we are expecting a five-star hotel chain as well as agriculture and this will be presented to the community. Madam Speaker, I know many parliamentarians try to speak about how beautiful and scenic their community is, but hands on, Madam Speaker, the ridges and valleys that make up Ojo Labs make it undoubtedly the most calming place. Speaker, you can ask the former Prime Minister, he has made it his sanctuary. He has made it his sanctuary, Madam Speaker. He has made it his place to re-energize. Why he did not do more for the community that gave him life. Madam Speaker, the opportunities that this project will bring to Ojo Labs is immense. I have engaged people into the community. I have engaged people into comments. There is a rich history which needs to be shared. The boat tours, engagements, the benefits to our farmers and fishers, Madam Speaker, and the list goes. The opportunity to form a Ojo Labs that has also been discussed. Madam Speaker, there is another component, Madam Speaker, which places the community that I represent on another level. And this and any other project that will come, search the whole of St. Lucia, search anywhere where there are people that cannot be duplicated, Madam Speaker. I continuously hear people say that this is the place to retire. From Ojo Labs. Madam Speaker, not too long ago, a meeting was held with the owners of Hotel Chocolate, Minister of Agriculture, and myself. Because to blend with their plan. In the tourist sector that have been given the green light. And while they're not in the shows and thought it was built, they will definitely jobs and opportunities to provide services and produce. The Canals Project, Madam Speaker, the Black Bay Project, and of course, Madam, the DSH project. Madam Speaker, it is obvious that with the magnitude of this DSH project, there will be concerns, Madam Speaker. What there's some enlightenment of some people who are so a true agenda. Madam Speaker, I have listened to some of the concerns. And Madam Speaker, those and that responses and responses will be forthcoming to a later phase. Madam Speaker, in the area of agriculture and fisheries, the elephant in the room for me, Madam Speaker, is the situation with the fish landing site. As we refer to it, the fish pond. It is painful, Madam Speaker, to watch daily what these hard-working fishermen have to go through. Promise after promise to relieve that situation, Madam Speaker, have come to nothing. Madam Speaker, this facility was constructed by the Japanese government. And in recognizing, Madam Speaker, the hardships that the fishermen were going through, Madam Speaker, in March 2012, they decided on a short-term measure by allocating $270,000 for the purchase of an excavator and $139,000 for the purchase of a truck. That would be managed by the Choiseul Village Council. Madam Speaker, both of these equipments were purchased locally. The excavator, Madam Speaker, broke down within 12 months of operation and is now an eyesore on the Choiseul waterfront. And the truck, Madam Speaker, never made it to Choiseul. Apparently, it broke down somewhere in Viewfort. You see, Madam Speaker, that is why friendly governments, it is very difficult to get their assistance when they recognize how we treat what is given to them. Since coming into office, Madam Speaker, we have been able to sit down with the Japanese officials who have promised to conduct a comprehensive review of the water currents and the design of the pond. They have decided, Madam Speaker, to do that review before allocating any additional resources. As we just see, la ville me mate. In the interim, Madam Speaker, government has gone into agreements with various contractors in exchange for the sun that they provide, and this provides a temporary relief to the fishermen. The problem, Madam Speaker, is that the inside of the pond is what really needs to be desilted, and the various contractors will not put their equipment inside the pond. So as fast as they remove the sun, Madam Speaker, it accumulates. And Madam Speaker, to compound that problem, the stockpiling of the sun is blowing into people's homes and businesses. And the trucks that carry the sun, Madam Speaker, the dust, Madam Speaker, makes it very, very unbearable. The situation is dire, Madam Speaker, and this must be given priority. And I'm happy that when I speak to the Minister of Agriculture, he always mentions to me, Madam Speaker, we have to do something about that. Madam Speaker, after the passing of Tropical Storm Matthew, some of our farm roads, which were already in a very deplorable condition, got further impacted as a result of poor drainage. The Ministry of Agriculture was able to secure some funding to assist various communities. And a case was made by myself for Upper Saltibus, Upper Daba, Tetmon, Gayabwa, Park Estate roads. The farmers who use these roads, Madam Speaker, are extremely grateful, and I want to thank the Minister of Agriculture for providing the assistance. I'm also delighted, Madam Speaker, that the Prime Minister has recognized the need to allocate additional funds to these feeder roads or farm roads, particularly in the Tetmon, Gayabwa, Park Estate. A more permanent solution is required to alleviate the dust the residents now have to contend with. And Madam Speaker, sometimes to sell my story, I take the minister down. I took the Minister of Agriculture to recognize what the people have to go through. I'm also very pleased, Madam Speaker, that the Ministry of Agriculture will continue to assist farmers with concessionary inputs to reduce cost of operations and boost production. Madam Speaker, in 2009, through the Banana Industry Trust, with funds from the European Union, a 120,000-gallon water tank was installed at Delsey to assist farmers with the irrigation of their farms. This tank, Madam Speaker, and we are blessed because it's fed by natural gravity and has done wonders for the farmers. The research, I understand, Madam Speaker, indicates that with the appropriate financial result, this water could reach all the way to Balambush. However, Madam Speaker, there appears to be no structure in place to provide insight, guidance, and a very individual approach to the maintenance and control has evolved. I have shared these concerns with the Minister of Agriculture, and very shortly we will be having a town hall meeting with the residents and farmers to enable them to put some structure. I want to take this opportunity, Madam Speaker, to highlight a young farmer from the community of Delsey as well, who has made the most of that irrigation system that's in place. A young farmer by the name of Mr. Jameson Alphonse, who has made a significant investment in the aquaponics field and is providing employment to people in the area. He was the recipient this year of the Chamber's Green Award, Idea of the Year Award, and Innovation of the Year Award. I am encouraged by his efforts, Madam Speaker, and I believe his story will encourage other young men and women to take advantage of the Youth Enterprise Facilitation Program, or YEP, and any other programs that will be available with the Ministry of Agriculture. Madam Speaker, late last year and leading into the new year, I paid a visit to all the schools in my community.
Honourable Member, you now have 15 minutes within which to complete your presentation.
Should be complete, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I said, I paid a visit to the schools within my community last year and early this year. Madam Speaker, c'était incroyable. Madam Speaker, we must appreciate the tolerance of our teachers and to a certain extent our children. And I wish to applaud, Madam Speaker, the hard-working teachers of this land. When our Prime Minister spoke of a failing infrastructure, he really should have underlined our schools, Madam Speaker. Because, Madam Speaker, when I see what is supposed to be the conditions that our teachers and our students have to face, Madam Speaker, I am even more convinced that things have to be done differently, Madam Speaker. This is no laughing matter, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the situation with the Choiseul Secondary School, we are too familiar with. Madam Speaker, sometime last year, when I began my political platform career, I highlighted how long the situation with the Choiseul Secondary School had been outstanding. Madam Speaker, a rush meeting was organized after to show plans early last year. I'm happy to report, Madam, that in January this year, a contract was issued for the construction of a temporary structure to accommodate the students that would have to be displaced. Construction took 3 months and is now in full operation. The new structure, Madam Speaker, houses the students. A roof that was caving in and falling on one of the NSDC buildings, what we know in Choiseul as the Handicraft Center. That roof was failing, Madam Speaker, and as a direct result of the shift, the ministry also got funds to replace the roof of the NSDC. So we kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone, Madam Speaker. And there's also, that room, Madam Speaker, is also housing facilities for the children of the school. Work, Madam Speaker, on the new blocks is expected to commence mid-May. From what I'm being told, next week, as early as next week, Madam Speaker, work will commence. In fact, on Tuesday, we will be having a very small, if you wish to, I know you like Chozel. I'll invite you. Yes, yes. A signing ceremony, Madam Speaker, so that work can begin. So, Madam Speaker, we'll be demolishing the old blocks and a construction of 2 new blocks. I thank the teachers and students for their patience, Madam Speaker, and I am sure the results, Madam Speaker, will be one that we will all be proud of. Madam Speaker, the principal, teachers, and students of the Saltibus Combined School, Madam Speaker, we must take our hats off to them, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if you see the toilets, my friend from Castries South spoke about Kaka. Well, you want to see Kaka? Madam Speaker, I mean, it is something that I did not believe existed in schools in this modern day. The school requires a completely new toilet block and major rehabilitation. Madam Speaker, I must commend the principal and the teachers because in November 2016, they were able to attract a donation of US $15,000 or 39,000 EC from Missionary Childhood Association. But the estimate that was done for the rehabilitation of that toilet block, Madam Speaker, is in the region of $98,000. So I have advised the Minister of Education that this should be a priority. I will also, Madam Speaker, see with the Minister for Economic Planning what can be done, Madam, because this is an urgent thing that must be taken care of, Madam Speaker. But we must commend, Madam Speaker, the principal and teachers, because I believe when people make the effort, they should be rewarded. And I will be continuing in the drive to get this matter resolved. Madam Speaker, the Delsa School. This is an interesting case, Madam Speaker, because right next to where the school toilet is located, and I was surprised yesterday, Madam Speaker, that the member for Ancillary Canary seemed to be having a similar situation with this institution. But Madam Speaker, there is a stone wall, and in my estimate, it's about 18 feet high, 12 feet across. And this wall, I understand, is supposed to have some historic significance, as it used to be part of a sugar mill. And therefore, the National Trust has assumed responsibility for this wall, Madam Speaker. And this wall forms part of the inventory. The problem is, Madam Speaker, this stone wall is slowly crumbling. And on a few occasions have injured children playing in and around it. It is my understanding that there have been calls placed to the National Trust so that a solution could come out, Madam Speaker, but up to a day like today, Madam Speaker, there's been no visit. Madam Speaker, the school septic tank, Madam Speaker, has been compromised, and the Honourable Member for Beaufort North gave me a history on the beauty of the ficus tree. But the septic tank of that school has been compromised by the roots of the ficus tree. And this, Madam Speaker, means they have to relocate the septic tank. And the area that is identified to relocate the septic tank is the wall. But, Madam Speaker, we cannot touch the wall. Madam Speaker, while I understand that we may not be able to address all the infrastructural issues as it relates to the educational facilities, we will seek to pay attention, Madam Speaker, to the following. The Diga Combined School, their roof is leaking when it rains. The PI Secondary concrete roof repairs and plumbing rehabilitation is required. The Roblo Combined requires an upgrading and fencing of the playing fields. The Montgouge Combined requires fencing and electrical work done. The PI Primary, ceiling repairs and the Rivadore School general repairs due to termite infestation. Madam Speaker, there is one very close to my heart because it's a stone's throw away from where I live, and that is the Reunion Primary School. The school foundation has been compromised. And I am aware that during the tenure of the last UWP government, the ministry had started designs. It's a big bill, Madam Speaker, but we cannot slip on it. Something needs to be done. We cannot cry after the fact. Madam Speaker, the Choiseul Soldibus community has 3 small community libraries. And I am troubled, Madam Speaker, that very basic essential for the proper function of these facilities are not forthcoming. It is my intention to dialogue with the ministry to ensure that these are included within the current allocations.
Honorable Member, you have 5 more minutes within which to complete your presentation. Honorable Member for Castries South East, Minister for Economic Development, Housing, Urban Renewal, Transport and Civil.
Madam Speaker, I would like to invoke Section 3210 to allow the member an additional 10 minutes to complete his presentation.
Honorable Members, the question is that Standing Order 3210 be invoked to allow the Honorable Member for Choiseul Saltibus an additional 10 minutes within which to complete his presentation. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Honorable Member, you now have an additional 10 minutes and you are now due to finish at 11:30.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will. Madam Speaker, I am pleased to note the inclusion of after-school programs for the community of Lamas, which is expected to roll out to other communities in my community of Choiseul Saltibus. Madam Speaker, this government is also pursuing to ensure, and I know that quite a bit has been done before, Madam Speaker, but there are still significant areas within the community that do not have internet access. And Madam Speaker, we have had conversations with various entities, Madam Speaker, and I'm very certain we will be providing some relief, Madam Speaker, to some of the young people because, Madam Speaker, in this day and age, Madam Speaker, it is very important that the ICT centers are equipped and properly equipped with internet access and the various communities, Madam Speaker, because our children need to do the necessary research, you know, and the reading that is necessary to build their capacity, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have heard in the past promises to build the Roblo and the PI community centers. I can promise residents, Madam Speaker, by the end of this financial year, work will have commenced on these facilities under the DVRP program. Madam Speaker, the community of Choiseul Saltibus is known for the arts and crafts. Sadly, Madam Speaker, what was once a bustling arts and craft center does not now provide a true reflection of the gift of our people, particularly for the organized stores, Madam Speaker. Our people must recognize the significant impact, this talent that they have, and they must learn to create, to modernize from the bulky pieces, Madam Speaker, and create pieces that excites. All these bamboo trinkets that we import from China, Madam Speaker, these can be made locally. And I have engaged the Cuban ambassador with the intention to organize a visit with a couple of our crafters to Cuba so they can appreciate firsthand how products can be diversified for mass retail, Madam Speaker. And then, in turn, we will bring down some of the people from Cuba to train our people. The opportunities are endless, Madam Speaker, but our thrust is to excite the younger generation so that they can take over. Madam Speaker, we must be relentless to engender in our people a spirit of entrepreneurship to be masters of their destiny, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the biggest challenge is access to credit. And Madam Speaker, I want to announce that we will be welcoming Managing Director of the Savings Bank Foundation for International Cooperation in Germany early June, where we will be signing an MOU, part of which will speak to easing the access to credit for SMEs, amongst other benefits. Madam Speaker, I am very pleased with the allocation of over 4 million for the rehabilitation of the roads in Choiseul Saltibus. This is very welcome, Madam Speaker, as prior to the last elections, we saw a certain burst of road surfacing, Madam Speaker. And it is really disheartening, Madam Speaker, that as I drive on some of these roads, Madam Speaker, the hardships that we have to go through. Madam Speaker, I think there should be penalties in place for people who abuse government contracts, Madam Speaker. Next week, I will be driving through the community with an official from the ministry, Madam Speaker, and I will be indicating to him the areas I believe which require urgent attention, Madam Speaker, and to see if it's in a line with what has been prepared by the ministry. I am sure, Madam Speaker, that relief will come to the people who commute these roads, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, as I indicated earlier, it is very necessary, Madam Speaker, that we applaud the Prime Minister initiative with regards to the 150, because I believe, Madam Speaker, our people will be the long-term beneficiaries of the road rehabilitation program. Madam Speaker, I want to speak to the Saltibus Road, Madam Speaker, because year after year, government after government has been promising these people some relief of this road. This road requires a total overhaul, Madam Speaker, and I will be continuously reminding the Minister, Madam, to the point where I believe he will actually think that this road is in his community, Madam Speaker. I will make it my duty, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Choiseul Village is unique because we only have one street. And a complete resurfacing of that street must be a priority, Madam Speaker. The increased allocation for bridges, cleaning of culverts, and drains is also going to make our people feel much safer, particularly with the increasing strengths of natural disasters, Madam Speaker. And I expect my community to receive its fair share of this allocation. Madam Speaker, desilting will continue in my community. And another area which must be given priority, Madam Speaker, is the issue of street lighting. There are a number of areas where housing developments have come up, Madam Speaker, and the issue of safety is one that we must make paramount, and I believe street lighting is crucial. Madam Speaker, our health centers, Madam Speaker, needs to be given some attention. It is really sad, Madam Speaker, that health centers have to call, to get assistance for fridges and things like that. These things should be in the total program, Madam Speaker. Shelters, Madam Speaker, is my intention to create shelters for the elderly before the health centers open, because they come very early from far and wide, Madam Speaker, and they have to wait, Madam Speaker, sun or rain, Madam Speaker. Sometimes they have to go to people's home and seek shelter. It is a priority, particularly, Madam Speaker, for the Lafargue Health Center, that I will, Madam Speaker, construct a shelter, Madam Speaker, to accommodate the people, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I applaud the Prime Minister with the initiative for universal health care. Madam Speaker, every day as I go to my office, the number of requests, Madam Speaker, for assistance, for some kind of medical attention, Madam Speaker, it is really, Madam Speaker, heartbreaking. And so I think this is one that the entire Parliament will welcome, Madam Speaker, the issue of universal health care. Madam Speaker, on the issue of sports, Madam Speaker, and I will go quickly, Madam Speaker, Choiseul community has been promised a mini stadium for so long. And it was a drive that I had when I came in to ensure, Madam Speaker, that this mini stadium becomes a reality. I have been searching high and low, Madam Speaker, because I recognized there was a grant that was given by the government of Morocco, Madam Speaker, which was, Madam Speaker, with the Town and Village Council. The past administration saw it fit to bring it back into the consolidated fund, and I have indicated to my Prime Minister that grant funds cannot be mixed into the consolidated fund, and, Madam Speaker, these funds should be made available for what it was initially intended, and that is the construction of the mini stadium, Madam Speaker. There has been already a meeting with the personnel from the Ministry of Sports, with the people on the design of the mini stadium. I must commend the Prime Minister too, Madam Speaker, as he speaks to the issue of coaches, after-school coaches, Madam Speaker, for our young people. And I must tell the people of Delse, Daba, Cafe, and PI that attention will be given to their fields, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, one more thing before I leave, Madam Speaker, and that the issue of land rationalization and proud. Madam Speaker, very, 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 very important is we must try to empower our people. And for too long, Madam Speaker, there have been people who have houses on lands, Madam Speaker, and they have no title. And they cannot get loans, Madam Speaker. I, Madam Speaker, will make it my duty as a minister, not just for Choiseul Saltibus, but also as the Minister of Invest, Madam Speaker, to ensure that Invest St. Lucia makes it a priority, Madam Speaker, to do what is necessary to provide these people with title to their properties, Madam Speaker. These people need to be able to empower themselves, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, finally, I want to speak to the assistance that will be given from the SSDF, Madam Speaker, the Public Assistance Program, very, very important for my community. Lots of elderly people, Madam Speaker, who have no means of income, and they come to me all the time, Madam Speaker. In closing, Madam Speaker, I want to thank the staff of my ministry who, Madam Speaker, who give me the fullest support, and I work with a very, very excellent set of people, and I want to thank them. And Madam Speaker, like I began my presentation, I would like to thank the people of Choiseul Saltibus, Madam Speaker, who are primarily responsible for me being in the House today. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honorable Member for Castries South. Would you like the...
Yes, Madam Speaker. Distribution. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I would like to commence by apologizing for being late this morning. I did indicate that I would have been present.
Honorable Member, your mic, please. I do wish to apologize because you were here and I did not make an apology on your behalf, and you did indicate why you had to leave. So my apologies on that note.
Madam Speaker, because I did get a message chastising me for not being here this morning, and I know I did try my best, despite the traffic from the north and the fear now that we will not have an improved network from Castries to Grosile. I did try my very best to be here. Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to the Appropriation Bill 2017-2018 and the budget address presented by the Minister of Finance. And I wish, Madam Speaker, to speak specifically on two aspects of the budget address, namely tourism and investment. And Madam Speaker, it's probably quite convenient or opportune that I am actually speaking after the minister in the ministry, the minister in the Prime Minister's office responsible for tourism and the minister who is responsible for investment. But before I go any further, Madam Speaker, I think I need to say a few words to the member from Ancillary Canneries. Because, Madam Speaker, he said a lot last night, and in the wee hours of this morning, because I did not hear him live last night, I tried to replay what he said to listen, and I must admit that I did not find very much. And it really brought to my mind the conduct of the member from Ancillary Canneries and this honorable House. He's been the most vocal. And you'd recall during the debate on the estimates, the member for Beaufort South spoke of he being the smallest and shortest and being the loudest. And Madam Speaker, one thing I've quickly learned in this House is you must learn to take picong. When you give, you must learn to take. And Madam Speaker, I was a little disappointed by the reaction of the member for Ancillary Canneries, because if you give him picong, you must learn to take picong. And I'm not talking about crossing the line and being offensive or insulting. I'm talking about picong at each other. And I noted yesterday, Madam Speaker, that the member from Answer Canaries was being coached by the member from Castries Southeast. And I smiled because I was saying, Balfini. Because I hope the member from Answer Canaries realized that the member from Castries Southeast is very good at what he does. And it's because he's been himself. He is what he practices. That's him. And maybe the member from Answer Canaries. And I joined him and two others had been the novice in this house. The four of us were here for the first time. And we must all try to find our own personality, our own style in the house. And I probably would advise him, do not try to be like the honorable member from Castries Southeast. And when he does get some pick-on about his size, he does not go crying and saying that the member from Beaufort South was a little too brutal on him. Because I'll tell you something, Madam Speaker, the member for Castries North, I will never disrespect him. Similarly, I will never disrespect the Prime Minister. I will ask him tough questions, and I will make sure he's always subject to rigorous examination, but I will not disrespect him. I will not disrespect the member from Castries North. He's a former Prime Minister. But also, Madam Speaker, you look at his size and you look at mine, I cannot fit in his clothes. The member from Answer Canaries should note that the member from Beaufort South, he cannot fit in his clothes, and you should respect him. The member from Beaufort South, he shops at Tall and Mighty. The member from Answer Canaries shops in the children's section of department stores. He cannot fit in the clothes of the member from Beaufort South. And just like we are newcomers in this house, we have to earn our spurs. We must find our personalities, and we must learn to respect the senior members of this house. So, Madam Speaker, and I will come back to the honorable member a little later on, because he said a lot, and I will respond to him. But, honorable member, smile. Take it. You give pick-on, and then the moment you get a little blows, you hold in your belly and you're bending over. Take a few blows and smile. Smile, Madam Speaker. That's insulting. To say to him he disrespected the member from Beaufort South is insulting. Can I proceed, Madam Speaker? But, honorable member from Castries Office, I have said to you before, I will not answer you unless you can sue Richard Frederick or go on his program and defend yourself. Until then, I shall smile every time you say anything offensive to me. But Madam Speaker, it is natural for me to reject the philosophical approach which guides the Minister of Finance. My approach is fuel, not by opposing for opposing's sake, but by sentiments nurtured in me by the words of our national anthem. These immortal words forever ring loud and clear in the receptacles of my mind. Sons and daughters of St. Lucia, love the land that gave us birth, land of beaches, hills, and valleys, fairest isle of all the earth. Wheresoever you may roam, love, oh love, our island home. Madam Speaker, as a young man, I dreamt of working in London, Rome, New York, Paris, and I thank the good Lord that I was able to achieve my dreams. But no matter where I worked, I was always driven by the words of the national anthem. Wheresoever you roam, love, oh love, our island home. Madam Speaker, what does it mean to love the land that gave us birth? For me, it means an appreciation of our patrimony, recognizing that the present hills, beaches, and valleys are the inheritance of future generations, that this fairest isle of all the earth is a common heritage of all St. Lucians. So, Madam Speaker, loving the land that gave us birth means understanding our heritage, our culture, and our identity. It means feeling the pulse of the people, the ordinary people, and the youth that will inherit this land. It means having and demonstrating respect for the sentiments of St. Lucians, more so as it relates to their patrimony, historical journeys, and achievements. It means understanding what is meant by having your umbilical cord buried right here. I love my island. And Madam Speaker, I've had to study overseas. And before my studies were over, I was anxious to go back home. I have worked overseas, and I could not help but be so anxious to return home. It is then, Madam Speaker, I understood what our immortal Nobel laureate, Sir Derek Walcott, meant when he wrote, "I am not home till Session sings." It is because I love the land that gave us birth that I can reject the philosophy which guides the tourism and investment approach of this government and which is embedded in the budget statement. Quite simply, Madam Speaker, I can say to the Minister of Finance that St. Lucia is not for sale. As Jugboy is fond of saying, "Peya papuvan." Madam Speaker, the budget is described as a growth-led strategy approach. Madam Speaker, I believe in a growth-led strategy. We on this side believe in a growth-led strategy because, Madam Speaker, we accept we need investment. Yes, we need to create jobs. Yes, we need economic growth. But does that mean we have to be reckless and irresponsible? That we must sacrifice the inheritance of future generations for the sake of short-term and personal gains? Are we saying to our people that once you want something, go for it, take it, ignore the people's concerns, trample on their rights? Is that a message? By all means necessary? And Madam Speaker, I heard the member from Ancillary Countries again last night spoke about contamination and the need to cleanse an organization of certain people. Madam Speaker, if the member from Ancillary would read history, he would learn that there are some very unfortunate events in the history of mankind that came about because of cleansing. When you suggest to people you need to cleanse, Madam Speaker, and I can cite historical examples, and in more recent times, there was political cleansing taking place in certain countries. There's been racial cleansing, ethnic cleansing, Madam Speaker. And to suggest that an organization must cleanse itself of certain people, Madam Speaker, is the working and the making of authoritarianism, Madam Speaker. And the member from Ancillary is suggesting to an organization to cleanse certain people because they happen to be members of the St. Lucia Labour Party. And he said that the organization is tainted, Madam Speaker. And I asked him the question, since Cabinet has two persons who have worked before for Sandals, does that mean the Cabinet is tainted by Sandals?
Which organization are you talking about?
Does it mean it is tainted by Sandals? It doesn't mean that, Madam Speaker. And the honorable member must be very careful when he starts encouraging cleansing of people in this land that we love.
Which organization?
Madam Speaker,
Which organization?
Madam Speaker, the honorable member does not learn, Madam Speaker. I just threw a pick on him, and the member from Catherine's office came to his defense and said I was being insulted.
Yeah.
Honorable member,
So which organization are you talking about?
I believe, Madam Speaker, that what the Prime Minister wishes for every St. Lucian is not different to what any member of this House wishes for St. Lucia. And that is for employment opportunities, economic growth, a modern healthcare system and facilities, a revamped education system, and safety and security for all our children and visitors. But, Madam Speaker, our fundamental difference is how we approach and deliver these, and it is quite evident by the presentation of the Prime Minister that he plans to implement whatever he says he wants to do without a social conscience. And, Madam Speaker, whilst there have been many recommendations about many of these parastatal bodies that the Prime Minister referred to, the underlying fact that must be given in making tough decisions is the effect on people on our land. These decisions have snowball effects on households, on children, and on families, on communities, and we cannot be insensitive to the consequences of our decision making. We must make decisions, but we must never forget that people's lives are at stake. This is not a business that we are running. So when I hear certain members say, execute, 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 it reminds me of the firing squads, Madam Speaker. You executing the poor people of this country, Madam Speaker. They are executing, Madam Speaker, literally executing the lives and the future of children and families of this country, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I ask the question, Madam Speaker, what is the economic basis for the development of St. Lucia as presented in the budget? And Madam Speaker, the member for Ancillary last night said he was just starting to warm up. I've not even started warming up yet, Madam Speaker. So, and I hope he's not leaving to go anywhere. I want him to stay there, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we heard all of last year from members opposite that they were limited by the budget of Kenny Anthony, that they were taking their time to prepare a development plan based on the whole quadrant plan that Sir John Compton had, and that they will present it in this budget. And the Prime Minister presented it in his budget address. But what was there, Madam Speaker? The budget was vague and opaque. Almost every pronouncement came with further details to follow. Details will follow on tax reform. Details will follow on debt management. Details will follow on the National Health Care Fund. Details will follow on the supply warehouse. Details will follow on the privatization of postal service. Details will follow on public service management bill. Details will follow on the setting up of a temporary place for the courts. Details will follow on the relocation of the Natural Cultural Center. Details to follow, details to follow, details to follow. It's a details to follow budget. Madam Speaker, the developmental vision of this government is grounded in a deep belief in trickle-down economics. The Prime Minister in his address and in previous pronouncement had promised he would never deliver a deficit budget and that they would end borrowing. Yet we are seeing unprecedented borrowing. Never before we've had a budget presented in this Honorable House with such a large budget deficit. But Madam Speaker, and of course the member can always disagree and we can debate figures, and Madam Speaker, the point is, Madam Speaker, there is unprecedented levels of borrowing. But let us stop for a while and forget all the figures, Madam Speaker. Forget deficit, overall balance, borrowing. Can I ask, Madam Speaker, for the people of Castries South, Fuasho, Old Cemetery, Turnell Road, Lakudoy, Firehouse, Marigo, Bassett Joseph, all the communities, what's in this budget for them? What's in it, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, you will see increased prices for flour, rice, sugar, cooking gas, gas for vehicles, bus fare, bread. There'll be no laptops for children, no assistance to any fire victims, no employment for nice workers, no more cultural center, no more Radio St. Lucia, no more fish marketing corporation, no more marketing board, no more post office as we know it. On the other side, Madam Speaker, the government claims that it will pursue a tourism-led strategy that will attract investment and create employment. So, Madam Speaker, let us examine the budget address provisions for tourism. Little is said, Madam Speaker, except for page 12 and page 45, which says that $33.6 million will be allocated to the Department of Tourism, of which $28.9 million will go to tourism marketing and support for ELIF. The first question, Madam Speaker, is, are we going to pay back? Are we going back to paying for airline seats? Because the Prime Minister did say that in his budget address, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me share with you some of the statistics. And I want to start off, Madam Speaker, by saying what was inherited in 2011. 2011. At the time of the Labour Party coming to power in 2011, a number of properties in this country were in receivership. The Paradis, Landings, Club St. Lucia, Coconut Bay, Marlin Key, a number of them were in receivership. When the Tourist Board took over in 2011, and the member for Answer Canaries is fond of quoting, $6 million receivables were left. 10. Okay. When the Labour Party took over in 2011, $14 million were left behind in receivables. 1-4. And listen to that, Madam Speaker. $9.7 million was owed to one airline partner, a 64-seater plane. A decision that was made on the instructions of the Minister of Tourism at that time to subsidize that airline. $9.7 million owed out of a total of $14 million. Now, Madam Speaker, the Tourist Board between 2011 and 2016 has never attracted the amount of money that is being promised in this budget. In 2011-2012, $40 million. 2012-2013, $45 million. 2014-2014, $40 million. 2014-2015, $36 million. 2015-2016, $34 million. And that included monies for jazz and all other festivals and events, which is not included in this present allocation of almost $40 million. So the tourist board, with less money being allocated, was able to reduce the deficit they inherited from 14 million to what my records show is 6 million. But the member for Ancillary Canaries says it's 10 million. But I will go with 10 million. So with a declining budget, the tourist board was able to reduce the receivables from 14 million to 10 or 6 million, depending on who you believe. Madam Speaker, with that declining budget, what was the tourist board able to achieve? Increased overall stay-over visitors, 312,404 in 2011. By end of 2015, it was 344,908. And at that same time, Madam Speaker, remember, Club St. Lucia was closed. Papillon was closed. So a significant stock of your hotel bed is out. But yet, stay-over arrivals increased from 312,404 to 344,908. Substantial growth in the U.S. market, from 122,356 in 2011 to 152,738 by the end of 2015, with a reducing budget and an inherited receivables of $14 million. Cruise arrivals have increased from 630,000 K in 2011 to 666,000 in 2015. Overall, on-island expenditure went up by 25% in the space of 5 years, with a declining budget. What was one of the most admirable achievements of the tourist board was its strategy to deal with airlifts. Because you recall, I said 9.7 million was owed to an airline. We were paying for seats. A policy decision was taken then to stop that practice and adopt a new strategy to get airlift. And here what happened. The US increased by 9%. Additional JetBlue services, United Airlines services, additional Delta services. Canada improved by 11%. And of course, the service with Condor was renewed. All of this, Madam Speaker, has resulted in an increased demand for St. Lucia, a feat achieved on a reducing budget with a debt overhang of $14 million, Madam Speaker. Now, Madam Speaker, the member from Ancillary Canaries, who is not the Minister of Tourism, is the minister in the Prime Minister's office responsible for tourism, will claim that St. Lucia underperformed. The data I just gave you showed that St. Lucia performed. But let us look at St. Lucia's performance within the regional landscape. St. Lucia had the longest history of growth among a comparable grouping. Now, we'll take out the Caribbean islands, the smaller ones, the Eastern Caribbean. We will take out Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, whatnot, because you have a larger side, larger bed stock. So we take comparative countries. We'll include Barbados in that. St. Lucia had the longest history of growth among those islands. St. Lucia performed above average for 2012 and 2014. And the only reason why St. Lucia was not above average for 2014 and 2015 was because Barbados and Grenada had huge increases because of the two Sandals properties that opened in Grenada, one in Grenada and one in Barbados. Other than that, for 4 of the 5 years, St. Lucia would have performed above the average for the Eastern Caribbean. Madam Speaker, is it true, and I heard the Prime Minister in his address thank the new minister in his office for the sudden revolution in tourism in St. Lucia. Is there a sudden revolution, Madam Speaker? The new TUI airline service, those things were negotiated 2 years ago. I read minutes of an airline committee meeting, that airline lift strategy committee meeting, that spoke of those negotiations taking place. Madam Speaker, cruise lines booked 2 years in advance. Everything that's happening now is that the country is riding on the momentum of all the hard work of the previous tourist board. That's what has happened, Madam Speaker. And yet, Madam Speaker, the staff of the tourist board was sent home, and they take pleasure in saying that we've disbanded the tourist board. Madam Speaker, I am a professional before I was a politician. I've worked in many professional capacities, and I respect professionals, regardless of the political stripes. I'm coming to that one, Honourable Member. I'm coming to that one, and I've warned you, do not interfere with me. Go on to Richard Frederick. Madam Speaker, I need to make that point, and I want the Prime Minister, when he's finished, I'll continue. Yeah. Madam Speaker, when you dismiss workers, professionals who serve their country, regardless of political party, Madam Speaker, it is one of the lowest acts to do. These are professionals, Madam Speaker. Number of persons with families who've worked hard all their lives, and because they believed to be tainted or they needed to be cleansed, they were sent home. And people take joy in doing so, Madam Speaker. We cannot build a country like this, Madam Speaker. And I have a lot of sympathy for persons who are treated that way, Madam Speaker. So all that has been so far, Madam Speaker, is that this new minister has dismantled the operating structure of the SLTB, causing pure confusion in the marketplace, increased the tax on travel to St. Lucia, no new marketing initiatives, and he has killed the spirit of the Jazz and Arts Festival. And Madam Speaker, I'm not going to join many people who've already spoken of the doom and the failure of Soleil St. Lucie or Soleil St. Lucia. I'm not going to do that, Madam Speaker. Let us judge it over the next 2 to 3 years. But Madam Speaker, I have a fundamental difference with you having spent 25 years to build a premier jazz festival in the Caribbean and one of the best known globally, and for you to totally abandon it like this, Madam Speaker. Thousands of people got to know St. Lucia because of the jazz festival. It was a successful endeavor, Madam Speaker. And for you to decide that I'm not suggesting you should not add on other attractions, but to totally cast aside the St. Lucia Jazz Festival, and of recent time, the St. Lucia Jazz and Arts Festival, one of the most inspiring events in the history of the Jazz Festival that I visited last year was the Arts Village near the shop roundabout. When I visited, I got goosebumps, Madam Speaker, to believe that St. Lucia could have produced this.
How much you paid for your ticket?
Madam Speaker, the honorable member is a real jokester, Madam Speaker. He's a real jokester. I've told you, Madam Speaker, tell him he cannot fit in the clothes of certain people. You understand, Madam Speaker? And I'll tell you how much my ticket costs, Madam Speaker. I have no difficulty in paying to go anywhere. I support the arts, I support sports. I go to fields, to events, and I pay my money because I like to support it, Madam Speaker. And ask people to run. Before politics, I had a life. I was a professional, and I worked in Dubai, Singapore, London, New York, Madam Speaker. I was a professional before. I don't have to depend on politics to give me a free ticket, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I will give Soleil St. Lucia a chance to succeed. But I will tell you one thing. I think St. Lucians are hurt by what this government has done to the St. Lucia Jazz Festival. Enough said. Madam Speaker, I cannot help, and the member from Castle Southeast just shouted, that's why I wanted to bring cruise ships to Cricket World Cup. So let me spare a few moments, Madam Speaker, to speak about Cricket World Cup in St. Lucia. And Madam Speaker, I want to quote the member for Miku South. Hear what he said during his budget, during the closing of the debate on the estimates. First of all, in 2007 to 2011, we had the construction for the Cricket World Cup 2007, and after all the hype, ended up being a complete disaster. You say it ended up being a complete disaster. In fact, St. Lucia spent nearly $85 million on hosting Cricket World Cup, and we had a stadium already. But we've never really had a thorough investigation as to where the $85 million went. But I remember who was the CEO of Cricket World Cup in 2007 was. Let's go again. We never really had a thorough investigation as to where the $85 million went, but I remember who the CEO of World Cup Cricket St. Lucia was in 2007. Madam Speaker, Cricket World Cup was not relevant to the debate on the estimates, so clearly it was an attempt to attack me. So please bear with me, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when I got involved in Cricket World Cup, a bid book had been circulated. In that bid book, there were projections of all the tourism benefits Cricket World Cup would bring to the region. And at my very first meeting, I asked, where did those figures come from? Because they did not look realistic. And I was told there was a tourism guru who had advised Cricket World Cup on those figures. And I inquired, who was that guru? And it was Alan Chasney. He sat on the Cricket World Cup regional board. He can deny it, Madam Speaker, the member for Mico South. I was the local CEO. Honorable Fortuna Belrose worked with me as the operations manager at Cricket World Cup. And she can tell you, the member for Mico South was the chief advisor for Cricket World Cup, saying that there'll be thousands of people coming to this region and asking Cricket World Cup to tell governments to invest in cruise ships, in expanding hotel stock, because there will be thousands and tens of thousands of people coming to this region. So, Honorable Member for Cassis Office, when you say to me, I wanted to bring cruise ships, I will tell you something. No, I'll remind you. Don't just stop. I will remind you. Madam Speaker, when the member says that, you know who advised Cricket World Cup that we will need cruise ships? The member for Mico South. And he can deny it, Madam Speaker. He can say he never advised them, and he can always stop me on a point of elucidation. I will yield to him to say that he was not the one who advised. But, Madam Speaker, let me continue. So we were told...
I stand up on, Madam Speaker, and Standing Order 34B, I believe it is, on a point of hallucination. In fact, if the member wants to impugn my name, the honourable member wants to impugn my name, I would suggest that he bring some proof here. Because like him, I inherited a situation. And it was not for me. I was a member of a board of 17 people, of which, in fact, the CHTA, and it's on public record, Madam Speaker, that the CHTA said that they should not be doing it because it was in the middle of the Christmas season. And in fact, the CHTA was never in support. And that is on public record. But what he cannot provide on public record is any evidence, and I'm asking him to withdraw the statement, that there's any evidence that Alan Chasney was the guru behind the numbers projecting what the tourism was going to get. That is the numbers that were coming from the government, and the Hotels Association, the Caribbean Hotels Association was very clear that even the numbers of rooms that we had available in the middle of winter could not generate those numbers. So I'm asking him to please withdraw the statement.
Madam Speaker, I might have been minded to withdraw it, except that the member so wrongfully suggested that he told them not to do it because I was during the middle of the Christmas season. Cricket World Cup was in April and May, Madam Speaker. It wasn't in no Christmas season, Madam Speaker. The honourable member does not even recall or know what he's talking about. I will not yield this time, honourable member.
Speaker,
I shall proceed. So, Madam Speaker, I will not yield this time. I yielded once, I will not yield. Honourable member, I will continue. I will not yield this time. I gave you one chance and you blew it. Madam Speaker, you just said Christmas, honourable member. Winter. Oh, winter. April, May is not winter. Yes, April is. Madam Speaker, so, but I'll be generous to the honourable member. I will not say he was the chief tourism guru. I'll say he was one of the persons who served on the regional cricket board that advised and put in the bid book that those were the numbers we should expect. But Madam Speaker, I remember I made a presentation at Rex St. Lucian to the SLHTA on St. Lucia's preparation for Cricket World Cup. And we were told, and the honourable member was there, we were told, Madam Speaker, we can never do it. St. Lucia will never be ready. There'll be too many people coming in. We will not be able to do it. Madam Speaker, history said otherwise. But you know the other thing I remember about Cricket World Cup, Madam Speaker, and I smile sometimes when I remember it. Elections was December 11th, a Monday. On the Tuesday, I got a call from Don Lockerbie. He was coming to St. Lucia on the invitation of the honourable member for Mico South to meet the person who was going to be Minister of Sports and to meet the incoming Prime Minister. And one of the items we wanted to discuss was firing me as CEO of the local organizing committee. The honourable member from Mico South came upstairs Colony House, where our headquarters was located, to meet Mr. Don Lockerbie. And when he entered the room, I expressed some choice words to him, which I cannot repeat in this house. I will not repeat it. But I told him then, for you who had never stepped into this office to advise any of us on how to better St. Lucia hosting of Cricket World Cup, but would come today to ask Cricket World Cup to fire me, says a lot about you as a person and as a St. Lucian. Madam Speaker, but you know what happened, Madam Speaker, is a lesson about politics. The new board fell under the member for Grosley, and it was chaired by a gentleman who was a friend of mine. We campaigned hard against each other in 2001 He on the side of the member for Grosley, I on the other side. But we never became enemies. Never. And of all persons to be made chairman of the board is that friend of mine, Lon Theophilus. And when I indicated to him the experience I had with the member from Microsoft wanting to fire me, he said to me, the member for Grosley has made it very clear he has no intentions of anybody firing me. Get the job done, make St. Lucia proud. That's what the member from Grosley said. He's changed now. He's firing people 90% of all those. But then he wasn't, Madam Speaker, but he wasn't exactly as he is now. Because and I want to tell Madam Speaker, and I got support from the member from Grosley during his time of Cricket World Cup, and I got support from Lon Theophilus as chairman. Madam Speaker, and Madam Speaker, let me end Cricket World Cup to say something. Madam Speaker, when we left, we were supposed to table a report before Parliament and an auditor's report of how the money was spent. Honorable Belrose can testify. A report was sent to the government, auditor's report, which stated that millions of dollars were left behind in the account of Cricket World Cup. Was that report ever tabled, Honorable Member, in this House? Was the audited report ever tabled in this House? So when you are going to ask and you're going to say there was never a thorough investigation of Cricket World Cup monies, the responsibility was on you and your other colleagues to table in this House the report and the auditor's report to say how much money. And I am asking in this Honorable House, the Honorable Member made the statements. Can you tell St. Lucia where did the millions left behind from Cricket World Cup, where did it go? Now, I'm not suggesting anything untold happened with the monies. I'm not suggesting that. But if you want a thorough investigation, start by saying where the millions of dollars left behind, where is it right now? I assume it might be in some account in the Treasury, Madam Speaker. But by then, Madam Speaker, I had left to work in New Jersey, Madam Speaker. But you know what Cricket World Cup taught me, Madam Speaker? That as St. Lucians we can achieve when we come together as one, regardless of political affiliation. My right-hand person is now a minister of the United Workers' Party government. And we worked as a team beautifully. We laughed, we joked, peeked at each other, but we never allowed political differences to deter us from the task of making St. Lucia proud. And you know what was the consequence of that, Madam Speaker? When the ICC wanted to host a World T20, Madam Speaker, they came to St. Lucia to look for the best staff that they had during the Cricket World Cup. During match days, we had over 1,700 St. Lucians mobilized throughout the country, police, talk about it, to make sure those matches were successful. And the ICC said, we want to go to St. Lucia. And they asked, who was the CEO in St. Lucia? And they said, we want that person to head the World T20. And then we started the World T20 preparations and hosted it in the region from St. Lucia, Madam Speaker. So when the Honorable Member and the Member for Cash's office wants to talk about, you think that's cricket, you think that's cricket, you think that's cricket, that is what cricket left behind in St. Lucia. We used to host the best matches in St. Lucia. England, Australia, India. You know who we host now, Madam Speaker? Afghanistan. That's the legacy of the Member of Cash's South East. Madam Speaker, let us look at investment, Madam Speaker. Members on this side believe that St. Lucia needs investment. The St. Lucia Labour Party was the party in government which passed the most progressive incentive and stimulus legislation to promote investment. We did, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we sought and approved a number of major investment projects before the meeting office, so we know how critical it is to have investments. We are pleased, Madam Speaker, and I was pleased to hear the member for Roselle Saltibus announced that they have decided to continue the plans that we had for at least the Hotel Lanes constituency. And to hear the member of Ancillary Canaries say that they're going to continue the plans to increase our bed stock, I think probably it's the member from Miko South who said it, by over 2,000 beds over the next 5 years. But Madam Speaker, I take you to the budget address from the Prime Minister, pages 12 to 14, Madam Speaker. And let's look at the projects that will lead growth in this country over the next few years, Madam Speaker. The first one, Madam Speaker, is Royalton. Royalton was conceived, was built under the St. Lucia Labour Party, and it was opened under the United Workers' Party. Madam Speaker, Harbour Club will be open towards the end of this year. Again, it started under the Labour Party. It will be completed United Workers' Party. Madam Speaker, Coconut Bay expansion, discussion started under the Labour Party, will be completed under the United Workers' Party. Madam Speaker, the Fairmont development Shabusha that the member from Strozel Soliber spoke about, Madam Speaker, and he's made it very clear, and I appreciate his honesty, Madam Speaker. But Madam Speaker, there is one aspect of it I need to clarify for the records of this House. And the member from Miku South again, Madam Speaker, was saying how we sold the land with the road. And Madam Speaker, the people down in that area, Morgouge and the surrounding areas, Madam Speaker, are a little distressed by the fact that the road will be closed and they need to take a detour that will add almost half an hour on their journey times. And in response to it, persons are saying we sold the land with the road, knowing that they were going to close it. And I've circulated as a document of the House, Madam Speaker, the concept of the hotel that was presented to us, and you will see on the concept that the road was always part of what they intended to be the development, Madam Speaker. So it is wrong, Madam Speaker, and I'm very heartened, Madam Speaker, that the member for Strozel Saltibus did not go down that road, Madam Speaker, but the member for Miku South did. And he did, Madam Speaker. Of course, Madam Speaker, the developers have asked for the road detour. And they first raised it, Madam Speaker, before the government changed. And we indicated to them, this is a matter for the Ministry of Infrastructure and for discussions in the community. Of course, elections interceded and there was a change of government. So there's no truth, and I want the residents affected to know that there's no truth that we sold any land knowing that the road would have been blocked. The drawings tell you what the concept was because it made it very clear to them the critical importance of the road to the people in the neighboring communities. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister announced that Redrick Beach will now host a Curio by Hilton, replacing where Rex and Lotion is. I will come back to that one, Madam Speaker.
So who started that?
The honeymoon, I'll come back to it, Honorable Member. Honeymoon Bay Resort in Canals, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I know from our time there were discussions on such a hotel. And I will say later on, Madam Speaker, I know when we did our due diligence on the developer who at that time wanted to build a hotel, he failed the due diligence. So, Madam Speaker, I will ask the Prime Minister later on to explain to me whether it's the same developer and whether a man who failed due diligence has been allowed to invest in solution like this. But we'll come to this one. These are ticklish matters, Madam Speaker, but we will speak about it in a while. The range developments, Madam Speaker, that the Prime Minister was so critical of, I am glad despite all his criticism, Madam Speaker, he's going to allow the project to go ahead. But I want the Prime Minister to remember the Carlton, Ritz-Carlton development in that same area. Who gave away St. Lucian lands, and that the new St. Lucian Labour Party coming in 2011 had to buy back the Black Bay lands and the Canal lands to a tune of almost $60 million. Who was Minister of Tourism then when that decision was made? And St. Lucia lost all those lands. But he's critical of it now, but I've heard he's going ahead with the project. He announced it in his budget address, so I'm very pleased that employment will be created for St. Lucians. Madam Speaker, he announced...
Who sold the lands at Pigeon Point?
Who sold? Madam Speaker, the honourable member is ignorant of St. Lucia's history. The St. Lucia Labour Party was the one who made Clico, who owned Pigeon Point, to return it to the people of St. Lucia, honourable member. So don't ask me who sold Pigeon Point, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, can you caution the member from Ansley Carrinsomie, please, Madam Speaker? Can you caution him? Madam Speaker, Sandals Resort was announced by the Prime Minister. The development for Sandals Resort started under the St. Lucia Labour Party. But Madam Speaker, I listened to the budget address by the Prime Minister. I listened to the member last night from Ansley Canries, Madam Speaker. You know, honestly, Madam Speaker, there are people in here who do not know that Pigeon Point was not owned by St. Lucia until the ending of the 1990s, Madam Speaker. Can you imagine that? And we are sitting in the highest chambers of this land, and people are feigning ignorance about those matters. Sandals Resort was announced by the Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister, nor the member for Ansley Canries announced. And I would like the Prime Minister to explain to us, because circulating yesterday on CNBC, on Reuters, and a few other news feeds was that the Sandals hotel chain is exploring options for sale. And therefore, if that story is true, and like I said, it came from CNBC, Reuters, that Sandals Hotel has engaged Deutsche Bank to explore options for sale and divestment of Sandals. And what is the consequence of that for the building of the Sandals Resort. And I assume, Honorable Member from Answer can, since you spoke about people being tainted, you might be so tainted to be able to give me a response at the appropriate time. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, so those were the hotels that were announced by the Prime Minister in his budget address, Madam Speaker. Almost all of them, Madam Speaker, except one, Curio by Hilton, started under the St. Lucia Labour Party. All of them. But, Madam Speaker, I want you to note something about the data that the Prime Minister gave, and I want all members to help me understand it. Madam Speaker, just follow this. Curio by Hilton will have 500 luxury rooms, page 14, Madam Speaker, but will cost $100 million US. 500 luxury rooms will cost $100 million US. Honeymoon Bay Resort in Canals will have 250, half, but will cost $360 million. 360 million, page 14 of the Prime Minister's budget address I'm quoting from. Okay, all right. 300, okay. Because you're speaking about two hotels. Okay, two hotels, so 330. Okay. 500 will cost 100 million. 330 rooms will cost 360 million. Okay, with a golf course. Range, 180 rooms will cost 130 million. Sandals, 350 rooms will cost 250 million. Explain to me how a hotel that's going to cost 500 million, 500 rooms, will only cost 100 million. You follow me, Madam Speaker? If you just look at the cost per room, there's something abnormal about that figure given for Curio by Hilton on Redry Beach. There's something curious about it. Madam Speaker, so there's something unusual about those things, about those figures, and I'm sure the Honourable Member will explain. But there's something else, Madam Speaker. How many of those projects are deemed to be CIP? So, Madam Speaker, Fairmont will be CIP, Canals will be CIP, Range will be CIP. 3 of those projects will all be CIP projects. So it says a lot about the importance and the reliance on CIP moving forward, Madam Speaker, a topic we shall come back to shortly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in all our endeavors on this side, Madam Speaker, we were guided by a clear principle that we will never sell St. Lucia, that we will never agree to recklessness and disdain for St. Lucians, that we will never vulgarize our country and its people, Madam Speaker. And I ask, Madam Speaker, why can't we conceive of a St. Lucia that is a reflection of our personality, our history, our islandness? The world is in awe of our natural beauty, so much so that we have a World Heritage Site. Do we have to think of causeways and skyscrapers to define ourselves? Do we have to believe that every piece of idle land is useless land? Do we have to believe that history has no place and Pigeon Point can be desecrated? Do we have to believe that the Suffrage Cemetery must be uprooted to be replaced by a skyscraper hotel, Madam Speaker? That was actually a plan in the last UWP government, as a people of Suffrage. There was a proposal by our Minister of Tourism then to do so. Do we have to believe that it is a choice between snakes and jobs? I believe, Madam Speaker, that we can build a St. Lucia that can be chic, sophisticated, and charming. It does not have to look like Dubai, Miami Beach, Shanghai, or Hong Kong. Why can't we look like simply beautiful St. Lucia with its own uniqueness? It is for this reason, Madam Speaker, that we had not signed and presently reject the proposed DSA project in its present form, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I refer to page 19, and Madam Speaker, do inform me of my time at the appropriate moment.
You now have 15 minutes within which to complete your presentation. Honourable Member for Castries East, Leader Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise and stand in order 3210 to request an additional 30 minutes for the member from Castries South.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order 3210 be invoked in order to allow the Honorable Member for Castries South an additional 30 minutes within which to complete his presentation. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Member for Castries South, you are now due to complete your presentation at 1 o'clock.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and honorable members. Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I was referring to page 19 of the budget address. Madam Speaker, DSH is not St. Lucia, not in its terms and conditions, and not in its design. Madam Speaker, how can a government that professes to love St. Lucia, that asks us to proclaim that I am St. Lucia, sign an agreement which provides the elements which the leader of the opposition highlighted yesterday? An agreement that provides a buyback clause, Madam Speaker, that if the investor within 2 years cannot mobilize 200 developers, he has a right to invoke the buyback clause, Madam Speaker. How could you sign an agreement that has the escrow account provisions that were signed, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, how can you agree to sign an agreement, Madam Speaker, where the government has to offset the cost of purchase of land by the private developer, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, how could you sign an agreement that provides no security for St. Lucian workers, that gives away the land where the stadium is, that guarantees CIP approval in 45 days? And Madam Speaker, whilst all those provisions hit at the core of who we are, St. Lucian, the biggest insult in this proposal is the business plan, Madam Speaker. And there are members on the other side who have some business training. Madam Speaker, in the agreement, the developer included a clause that spoke of the gross development value of the project. Madam Speaker, why would you sign an agreement that has that, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, let me explain to you the significance of that. And the honourable member from Roselle Solibus is a banker, so you can understand what I'm saying. Madam Speaker, and it's according to how the CIP works, because the developer was exceedingly smart in ensuring that was put in the agreement, knowing that he's applying for CIP status, Madam Speaker. If a developer comes to you and he says, I want to build a hotel, and the cost of the hotel is $100 million. I have 40 million equity, and I want to raise 60 million from CIP. Accordingly, if you approve the project, you will give him 200 citizenships allotted to him. So 200 by 300,000 is 60 million. 60 million and 40 million, he can build a hotel. He operates it and he makes a profit. But if that same developer comes to you and he's not speaking gross construction costs, he is saying gross development value, which means the retail value of the development when it's finished. And he tells you, what I want CIP approval for is a gross development value of 200 million. Stand on what, Madam Speaker?
Standing on the point of order, let's hear it.
34A.
34.
Madam Speaker, the member for Castries South continue to speak about this agreement that nobody knows about. There is an internet document, Madam Speaker, that is an alleged document. And the members opposite continue to make it look like there's some formal agreement in this House.
Honorable Member for Castries South East, I take the point. Honorable Member for Castries South, I have indicated and I have ruled that the document will be referred to as the purported or alleged agreement.
Thank you,
Please
Madam
be
Speaker.
so guided.
The purported or alleged document that the member from Microsoft agreed that was a legitimate document and authentic. So I shall move on, Madam Speaker. But Madam Speaker, it's on YouTube. If you had a projector, I would play it now to show you the interview where the member from Microsoft said. But Madam Speaker, I'm losing time, so let me continue. The alleged document, yeah, Madam Speaker? So I was saying, Madam Speaker, if a developer comes to you, and instead of saying $100 million, he says gross development value of $200 million. But remember, he has equity of 40 million. So he now has to raise 160 million. So you have to give him citizenships to the value of 160 million. which is about 500 odd. But he builds it for 100 million. So what happens to the other 100 million? It goes as profit, Madam Speaker. So he's building the same hotel, but before he even starts operating it, he's made a profit of 100 million because the construction cost is 100 million. So you have to be very careful, Madam Speaker, that when you approve the projects, you do not approve gross development value, but you approve gross construction costs. The developer is planning to build a project, $2.7 billion, Madam Speaker, and is asking the country for over 9,000 citizenships, 9,000 passports to be able to finance it, Madam Speaker. 9,000, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, in his business plan, Madam Speaker, from information that I have, Madam Speaker,
Madam Speaker, point 34B, a point of hallucination.
Madam Speaker, I do not have to yield, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, can you allow me to
Where does
finish?
the number 9,000 come from, Madam Speaker? Where does the number
Prime
9,000
Minister,
come from?
understand please, on a point of elucidation, remember the member need not yield, and he has chosen not to yield to you. So he continue.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister can prove all that has been said on the internet wrong by being more transparent on DSH. He can be more transparent. He delivered a budget address, and nowhere in it were the concerns of St. Lucian's address. He was deliberately vague, Madam Speaker, and he insulted the people of St. Lucia in this chamber by having the investors sit in this honorable house, Madam Speaker, during a budget address, Madam Speaker. Never before has that happened. So, Madam Speaker, he needs to be very careful, Madam Speaker, when he seems to suggest that people should not speak about DSH, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, the construction cost of the project, Madam Speaker, is about $1.7 billion. So the developer is going to make about $900 million profit before he even starts making any operational profit, Madam Speaker. This, Madam Speaker, is a rip of our country, Madam Speaker. And one of the reasons why we will never support the terms and conditions of DSH. And Madam Speaker, it was amazing to see how some honorable members, when the flashing mirrors, when the beautiful drawing was put up on the screen, wow, wow, wow. And I'm saying to myself, see, there were some members, I must tell you, on the opposite side, who did not applaud. And I was watching, Madam Speaker, because it said a lot about the flashing mirrors and what really appeals to them. It's not the figures and the story behind the development. It's how beautiful the picture looks. And it has high rise, so therefore it's going to make St. Lucia the new Dubai. Madam Speaker, what are the figures behind it? When a developer tells you he wants to build a $2.7 billion project using your passports, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister says that only phase 1 has been approved, Madam Speaker. Then, Madam Speaker, share the details with us, Madam Speaker. Share with us, give us, in this honorable house, the business plan behind phase 1. Because I'm sure, Madam Speaker, based on the documents I had seen when I first received the business plan from the developer, Madam Speaker, he's asking for about 2,000 passports for him to be able to finance phase 1, Madam Speaker. The Prime Minister has to come clean with this nation and give us the details on DSH, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, he promised he would do it. His attaché promised she would do it. His communications director promised she would do it, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister in his budget address said we must be bold and courageous. And he quoted the Roseau Dam, Millennium Highway, the Marina. But all those projects, Madam Speaker, were done by Sir John Compton. And may I say to the Prime Minister, he's no Sir John Compton. Look at the projects he was associated with. Boxing in Paradise, Ritz-Carlton in the South, Madam Speaker, Rum and Food Festival, Madam Speaker. And when the Honourable Member from Ancillary Canary speaks about lawsuits against workers from CCC, Madam Speaker, I need him to go into his research and find out about the great lawsuit they had in the St. Lucia Tourist Board about who really invented jazz in St. Lucia. Ask the Honourable Member to find out. And how much money did St. Lucia have to pay to settle the rights of who really originated jazz in St. Lucia, Madam Speaker? But, Madam Speaker, how can a government, Honourable Member, I've said to you, I'm inviting you to give all the information to the nation. How can a government which loves St. Lucia agree to the establishment of a dolphin park at our most decorated and well-known historical site, Pigeon Point? And, Madam Speaker, Richard Branson was in Barbados yesterday, and he was speaking about Virgin Cruises. And I want to read to you what he said, Madam Speaker. He issued a stern word of caution to the authorities in Barbados to preserve the environment in order to protect the island's bread and butter tourism industry. He spoke of the importance of recycling and called for an enormous effort to safeguard turtles and other sea creatures, as well as reefs, as well as major tourism attractions. At the moment in Barbados, the most important thing you have is tourism. Why do people come to Barbados? They come for its beauty and the species that are in the oceans of Barbados. And so a much greater priority should be placed on that. Madam Speaker, Richard Branson in Barbados yesterday, extolling Barbadians to do more to preserve the environment, to cherish the heritage and the sites, because people come to see us for our beauty and for those environmental sites we have that are so treasured. In St. Lucia, we seem to be going the reverse way. That it does not matter, Madam Speaker. Destroy it because we want to create jobs, Madam Speaker. Yes, we must create jobs, Madam Speaker, but we must always remember we are the custodians of the future generations, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the DSH agreement, the Dolphin Park project, and among others, Madam Speaker, tell us that this government is reckless, callous, and indifferent about St. Lucians. And what we think about the land that we love, the actions of this reckless and disrespectful government will forever be recorded in the history of this country. Madam Speaker, let me focus on two other investment projects quickly. Madam Speaker, the member for Mako South, in closing the debate on the estimates of expenditure and revenue, Madam Speaker, spoke about, in fact, in his budget address, Madam Speaker, on page 15, he spoke about Ojo Labs International. It is a most disturbing decision by the government, Madam Speaker, but one consistent with the approach of this government to investment, putting St. Lucia for sale. Madam Speaker, I refer to the concessions that the Cabinet of Ministers have agreed to give Ojo Labs. And I want the Prime Minister to be transparent and explain the decision of Cabinet on this matter. Madam Speaker, how can a government agree to put in 98% and invest 2% in an investment project in this country? Government is putting 98%, the investor 2%. The government has agreed, and the Prime Minister can deny it, to pay to retrofit a factory shell for the investor, $4 million. Pay to retrofit the factory shell, $4 million. Government to pay all the recurrent operational costs, electricity, water, internet, every month for the developer, for the investor. Concessions for all the vehicles he wants, and a boat, Madam Speaker. Why does a man coming to set up a call center have to get concessions for a boat, Madam Speaker? Oh, boats are duty-free. Okay, Madam Speaker. Pay $1,000 towards the salaries of the first 100 workers for 18 months. Let me say it again, Madam Speaker. The government of St. Lucia will pay the salaries, $1,000 a month, for the first 100 workers for 18 months, $1.8 million. After that, the government will pay $500 towards the salary of all the workers for an undisclosed number of years. Assuming 150 workers, Madam Speaker, it means $1 million for every year thereafter. The people of St. Lucia have to pay that for an investor. Government at its cost must market and promote the business on all its websites.
That's not nice.
In exchange, Madam Speaker, the government gets 15% equity in the business. Here it is, $4 million to renovate the factory shell, $1,000 for every 100, for each of the 100 persons for 18 months, $1,000. $500, Madam Speaker, for years and years to come. Pay all the operational expenses, pay for the marketing of Ojo Labs, and you get 15% investment, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is from a government that removes the subvention to the National Trust, that's threatening to remove the duty-free status of the Catholic Church, that fired the nice workers, that removed laptops for children, that removed the distress fund for fire victims, that removed the subsidy for flour and sugar, that's increasing the tax on gas. But worse, Madam Speaker, Honorable Raymond fired them, and we learned them never take his advice. I hope you do. But worse, Madam Speaker, and it shows that this is not an Alan Shastney issue, but the entire government, Madam Speaker, because I learned that the Prime Minister tried to remove himself from the discussion at Cabinet, citing, I believe it was conflict of interest. You could correct me. But, Madam Speaker, the persons who sit behind did not know all the details. But they still voted for it. They are all guilty, Madam Speaker, all guilty. It is a cabal of men and women who do not love St. Lucia. Yes, you, each one of you all are guilty in that decision as it relates to Ojo Labs, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, but what was the conflict of interest, Madam Speaker? What was the conflict of interest that the Prime Minister did not want to be part of the discussion? Is it because the developer is a client of the Prime Minister's wife? Now, Madam Speaker, I don't think that's really the issue, because she has a right to earn a living like everybody else, and she has a right to lobby and to push for her client, Madam Speaker. The critical thing, Madam Speaker, is the extent of benefits given to the developer. And every single member on the other side must ask themselves, Madam Speaker, how do you go to bed feeling comfortable that you fired all those nice workers, and instead you're taking the money and you're paying the workers of a foreign investor? When foreign investors come into a country, they're supposed to bring the money, Madam Speaker. They're supposed to bring their money. Madam Speaker, on page 47 of the budget address, the Minister of Finance says that $10 million is allocated for NAPS, which includes two components, a call center, Ojo Labs, and hospitality training. So, Madam Speaker, we are borrowing money to pay the expense of a foreign investor, because on page 464 of the estimates, almost $6 million of NAPS is from bonds. So we're borrowing money, raising bonds to raise money to pay the staff of Ojo Labs, pay the monthly operating expense of Ojo Labs. I do have a problem with it. I have a major problem with it. Because I don't mind, Madam Speaker, we're borrowing money to pay St. Lucia nice workers, but we're borrowing money to pay the expenses of a foreign investor, and members are asking me if I have a problem with that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as a St. Lucian, I really do have a problem with that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the member from Ancillary Canaries was very vocal at the last sitting, as I said, Madam Speaker. But has he ever said anything about West Coast Foundation, Madam Speaker, and the American Hotel and Lodging Association? With all his big talk, Madam Speaker, I want him to explain to the Honourable House, because West Coast Foundation, Madam Speaker, because, Madam Speaker, there was a lot of talk in the media recently about training done by an organization called Caribbean Hospitality and Training Institute. And I want the Honourable Member for Ancillary Canaries to tell me who owns it, who operates it. And, Madam Speaker, there was going to be hospitality training in this country. Not under NSDC, that usually happens, not under NRDF, but an organization has been set up called West Coast Foundation. And that contact was made with the American Hotel and Lodging Association, who was going to come and do training in St. Lucia at a cost of about $100 US, Madam Speaker. And if I had time, I would, Madam Speaker, show you, Madam Speaker, the listing of how much each course would have costed from the American Hotel and Lodging Association. But the Honourable Member will have to tell it, Madam Speaker. He will have to tell it. Because, Madam Speaker, he was stopped in his tracks. And somebody else ended up doing the training and charging not $100 US per head, but $1,000 a head, 1,000 EC. But all his big talk, he could not stand up and stop that. It had to happen. You're laughing. He had to allow it to happen. So, Madam Speaker, an organization called Caribbean Hospitality and Training Institute did the training, not West Coast Foundation. And I'm wondering if the balance of the money from NAPS, since some is going to Ojo Labs, whether or not the Honourable Member is told to relax, you will get your training for West Coast Foundation and the NAPS. I don't know. He can probably explain that. But he says a lot, and he's very boisterous and very vocal, Madam Speaker. But he probably should explain to the people of St. Lucia. And Madam Honourable Member, when you are...
Madam Speaker, I rise on a point of order. On a point of order, Madam Speaker, the member is Standing Order 34B. 34A, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, yes, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Member is imputing improper motive, Madam Speaker, and he's disseminating erroneous information. There's no West Coast Foundation, Madam Speaker, that I am involved with. So I asked the Honourable Member to produce the incorporation documents, and I asked the Honourable Member to produce proof to this Honourable House that I am involved in any organization called West Coast Foundation. Thank you so very much. Let's not abuse parliamentary immunity.
Honorable Member for Ancillary Canaries.
Yes, madam.
Improper motives, please. I'd like us to, all members, understand your standing orders and learn them, please. Please. And to my mind, I do not think, I'm sitting here, I do not think I understood the member to have indicated or heard him saying that you had interest in the said company.
Well, what he has implied, Madam Speaker, clearly, is that West Coast Foundation, somehow I was associated with it, and I attempted to do training via a West Coast Foundation. And so the Honourable Member, that is what he has said, and that is erroneous, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I shall move on.
And so, Madam Speaker, I ask that he withdraw the statement.
Which statement?
What
The
is
statement,
the statement?
the statement that the member for Ancillary Canaries has an organization called West Coast Foundation.
That has not been said here.
Madam
That
Speaker,
has
he has
not
implied
been said.
that but of course, he has insinuated, Madam Speaker, and I want him to clarify whether the assumption is that I have an organization called West Coast Foundation and whether I have attempted to do training via that organization.
Madam Speaker, I can probably say it again. Yeah? That there was plans, I became aware that there were plans to do hospitality training. The plans would have included an organization called West Coast Foundation. I asked the Honourable Member from Ancillary Canaries. He's involved in tourism. He's responsible for hospitality training. He came to this honourable house and boasted of hospitality training. And I'm asking him to explain why did the West Coast Foundation was no longer the one that undertook the training. And I told him the information reaching me was that the training rather be done through NSDC, NRDF. It was proposed to be done through West Coast Training. But instead, a company called Caribbean Hospitality and Training Institute did it. And I can say to him, I have information from American Hotels and Trades Association as to how much they would have charged to do the training in St. Lucia at $100 per person. Instead, I am told it was done by an organization, Caribbean Hospitality and Training Institute, and they charge 1,000 EC. Where in that statement, Madam Speaker, am I imputing that the Honourable Member has a personal interest in West Coast Foundation? Madam Speaker,
Thank you very much for clarifying.
Honourable Member, thank you for the clarification.
Madam Speaker, if the Honourable Member knows more than I have said, I leave that with his conscience, Madam Speaker. Yeah. Madam Speaker, the problem with this government is that it promised to be transparent and entrenched trustworthiness, but it has failed miserably. There is no transparency, no accountability, and no trustworthiness. The Prime Minister is governing like a banana peel, sliding from one instance of corruption and mismanagement to another. Never before, okay, Madam Speaker, sliding from one instance of mismanagement to another. Never before has the government been elected with such popular support and lost it so quickly. If the people of St. Lucia believe that the Labour Party was bad, this government is worse. The people of St. Lucia have replaced an imperfect friend with a deadly enemy. Madam Speaker, let me give you an example of the lack of transparency. In the estimates of expenditure and revenue, on page 29, there's an allocation of $500,000 for constituency offices. Was there an explanation given during the debate on estimates? Was there an explanation given in the budget statement? No, Madam Speaker. The same government which has passed an executive decision to grant elected members 100% duty-free on vehicles and 75% to nominated members. Since then, almost every member on the other side has bought a new vehicle, and one member on this side.
34.
Now,
Objection 34. On a point of objection, Madam Speaker. Standing order 34A. The member suggests that nowhere in the contribution was an explanation given with regards to the increase in the constituency allowance. Is that what you said?
in the budget address.
The budget address. Oh, okay, because the Honourable Minister did speak about it yesterday.
I saw the budget address. Now, Madam Speaker, I'm not speaking against the allocation to the constituency offices, Madam Speaker. I'm speaking about keeping it secret from the people of St. Lucia, Madam Speaker. This same government, which criticized increasing the constituencies, have increased the cost of maintaining Parliament by a greater amount. The same government that removed the subsidy for flour, sugar, that removed the laptop provisions, that increased gas tax, that removed the subvention for the National Trust, secretly increases benefits for their parliamentarians. The same government that increased the cost of cabinet by having 16 ministers. Is it true, Madam Speaker, and I'm asking the Minister of Finance, that government has approved personal assistance for every minister at a monthly salary of $6,500? Is that true, Madam Speaker? This will be a new expenditure of $1.2 million per year. Is it true, Honorable Minister of Finance? I don't know. Please inform me. Madam Speaker, was anything said last night, night before in the budget about the printry, Madam Speaker? We heard you closing Radio St. Lucia, Marketing Board, Fish Marketing Corporation. You've closed Tourist Board. What about the printry, Madam Speaker? Is it going to be closed? Has a decision been taken? Why wasn't it announced in the budget, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, this budget is risky and irresponsible. It is playing Russian roulette without the future of our children. Whatever you may say about the member for Beaufort South, look at our region and how many countries fell into the trap of the IMF. St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua, Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada. The member of Beaufort South ensured that we did not go to the IMF. He made some difficult decisions and he paid the price, Madam Speaker. It is sad that we are seeing a course being set again that will destroy our country and take us down the floats of the IMF. Madam Speaker, this budget is noted for its victimization and focus on promoting the interests of a few. It removes benefits for our children, the future of St. Lucia. It removes benefits for distressed families. It removes assistance to the National Trust. It removes Madam Speaker, the most telling statement of the direction of this country. Has not brought about a reduction in the stores. He knew that there would be no reduction in the prices for consumers. The same prices he said that was causing hardships when he cried on demand. For when he then says that he knew now that the reduction would bring no benefit. Madam Speaker, how can you say you're reducing VAT by 2.5% and you said you knew when you reduce it, it would not change the prices in the stores for the consumers? Madam Speaker, fight to stay alive is truly fight to stay alive. The government is prepared to give businessmen the reduction benefit and not fight for the consumers to get any. The government does not care about the people of St. Lucia. They do not understand the common people and their struggles to stay alive. The tears, Madam Speaker, the crying on demand was all a game to get their votes. Madam Speaker, I have to ask a question in the few minutes I've left. Where does Castries South fit in all of this, Madam Speaker? The potential of Fuashu and Banan as part of the development of Port Castries, Madam Speaker, of the old cemetery, Madam Speaker. And I know I'm the rep, Madam Speaker, and I will say something, Madam Speaker. You know, other persons have been through it before. The member for Castries East, and he survived, Madam Speaker. I know, Madam Speaker, every effort will be made to ensure I never get re-elected, Madam Speaker. And it's operating at all levels, Madam Speaker. I've been left out of everything that's going on, Madam Speaker. Tomorrow, Madam Speaker, the Castries City Council, the mayor is making a tour of Castries South. I have not been informed, I have not been invited. He's visiting schools and other places, but I have not been informed or invited, Madam Speaker. Can you believe that, Madam Speaker? Can you believe that, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, a few days ago, an event has been held in Castries South. And then the organizers are inviting me as parliamentary rep, and the ministry is saying, for you to get support from the ministry, you must not appear political and invite a parliamentary rep. You must also invite the losing candidate of the United Workers' Party for you to get your support. That's what's been said, Madam Speaker. And the organizers said, we will invite her, but our rep is the one who will speak. Madam Speaker, that's what goes on. That's what I'm ready for, Madam Speaker. So that's what I am ready for, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I know Castries South will suffer. And when anything is done in Castries South, Madam Speaker, it will be done behind my back without informing me, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, others have survived. And I too shall survive, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I heard the member for Castries South say under the CDP, he never got anything for Castries Southeast. I checked the records. About $3.7 million was spent in Castries Southeast, Madam Speaker. And it was misleading the House to say that Castries Southeast got nothing. The member may have been right to say they did not give him the money himself to do the things. But it was done in the constituency, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, if the work is done in Castries South, Madam Speaker, I will be happy. Because even if they don't invite me, Madam Speaker, I will be standing by the fences looking in at the ceremony, Madam Speaker. But I will be there. Because we have to finish the multipurpose center in Bassett Joseph. The youths of Fuasho, Madam Speaker, they need a court, Madam Speaker. The dancers of Fuasho, they need support, Madam Speaker. The people of Cicero, the youths need a playing field, Madam Speaker. The Marigo playing field must be finished, Madam Speaker. And Marigo is one of the premier tourism sites in St. Lucia, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, there's nothing in this budget. I heard the honorable member speak of village tourism. Honorable member, that's an old idea, and I'm glad you're going to revive it and make it work. You could look at some of the legacy plans of Cricket World Cup, and you'll see all the plans. We had the heritage tourism program in St. Lucia, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, Castries South, Madam Speaker, I know will be made to suffer. Because, Madam Speaker, I have to be slighted, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Castries South is on the floor. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, with all the interruptions, can you tell me how much time I have left? Because I've been interrupted on so many occasions, Madam Speaker. How much time do I have left, Madam Speaker?
You were supposed to be winding. I was supposed to have given you a 5-minute mark, but I've added 5 minutes to it. Yes, go ahead. You will now finish at 5 minutes past 5.
Okay,
past
Madam
1,
Speaker,
sorry.
I'll finish, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I was saying, Bannon, Madam Speaker, the old cemetery, Madam Speaker, those areas need attention. And if there's going to be any redevelopment of podcast series, Madam Speaker, I look forward to dialogue with all the people of those areas to discuss, Madam Speaker.
While at the beginning of the budget, the estimates, I indicated that members, it is your house, and some persons thought I was too stringent about time and allowing pecan across. The pecan will not be allowed across so as to disturb any member, that 2 other members are getting at each other and disturbing me from hearing the contribution of the member who's standing on his feet. Please be so guided. Honorable Member for Castries South.
Well, Madam Speaker, I knew that there would be frequent interruptions when I speak, Madam Speaker. So thank you very much for the protection that you've given me, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have to say a few words about CIP, Citizenship by Investment Program. But Madam Speaker, it's probably best that we leave it for the debate on the negative resolution. Because, Madam Speaker, no matter what is tried by the Prime Minister, the debate will take place, Madam Speaker. Suffice it to say, Madam Speaker, that the CIP has been discredited. It has become a shame for this land, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, the primary reason for it is not the fault of the professional people at the CIP unit. It is because of political interference in the running of the CIP, Madam Speaker. That is what is tarnishing the CIPs, Madam Speaker. And we are fast making a reputation globally as a country where politics decides who will get citizenship to St. Lucia through the CIP, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I made mention that when I was chairman of CIP, and Madam Speaker, the member for Miku South has said a lot about they had the wrong chairman, and that was his problem with CIP. We will debate that when we discuss the negative resolution. But, Madam Speaker, I don't want to attack other professionals, but the member will be well advised to look at his present chairman and decide whether or not his criticism can equally apply, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, I indicated that when I was chairman, we had discussions for a hotel in Canals, and I want the honourable member from Miku South to tell me, in the announcement of his budget address, is that hotel project the same project by the same company that had failed due diligence, Madam Speaker. And if somebody had failed due diligence, Madam Speaker, how is it now they can be approved to do projects in St. Lucia, Madam Speaker? And Madam Speaker, we'll have a lot to say about people who failed due diligence in the months to come, Madam Speaker. But Madam Speaker, you've heard a lot about Movie Tongue in Vieux-Fort. Who is the investor behind Movie Tongue, Madam Speaker? I need the honourable member from Mico South to tell St. Lucia that. Because, Madam Speaker, if the whispers I'm hearing, that it is the famous Jack Lamb, Madam Speaker, who was here in St. Lucia, I believe, at the signing ceremony, honourable member. The same person we've heard so much about. And I also heard, Madam Speaker, and I don't know, and I need the honourable member from Mico South to clarify, that this Jack Lamb has failed due diligence in other jurisdictions. And he's trying to get citizenship in St. Lucia. Tell us the details behind Movie Tongue, which is being proposed of Vieux-Fort. Who is the investor? Is it Jack Lamb? Is he an investor in the project? Is it somebody or people who failed due diligence, Madam Speaker? And all of that under CIP, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, presently, one bank in St. Lucia handles CIP monies. One Bank of St. Lucia. And there's already tremendous pressure, externally and internally, for it to stop, Madam Speaker. And to be stopped because there is suspected political interference in the decision-making of who gets citizenship in St. Lucia. Madam Speaker, we shall say more when we have the debate in this House on CIP, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this budget is the blueprint for a better St. Lucia. This government is not building a better St. Lucia. It is building a better St. Lucia. When a government can callously take away the subvention from the National Trust for opposing its actions, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When the government can get rid of over 1,000 nice workers with no regard for the welfare of their children who are the future of our island, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When the government can terminate the laptop program, denying all children a chance to learn and use technology, then we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When the government can reduce the VAT in a manner knowing that the consumers in the most need will not benefit from it, but instead serve the narrow interests of themselves and their friends, then we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When the government can terminate the distress funds for families who suffer from house fires and told to go and get insurance and stop being beggars, knowing they cannot afford to, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When the government brushes aside the advice and talents of its technocrats who have worked diligently under both UWP and SLP administrations and instead engage consultants for millions of dollars, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When the government does not understand that when people have been fired, been victimized, and have lost everything, then they are free to do anything, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. When a government victimizes and fires skilled, educated, qualified, and talented St. Lucians because they were working or continue to work during the term of the SLP administration, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. And when the victimized and the fired can on their own qualifications and talent get a new job in St. Lucia or even a regional job, and the government goes out of their way to block them from getting that job, we are not building a better St. Lucia. We are building a better St. Lucia. It is only when we can have a team of men and women to build a St. Lucia as a society that cares for all and an economy that works for all, then we can say that we are building a better St. Lucia. And this is the St. Lucia that we love. Madam Speaker, never before in the history of an independent St. Lucia have I ever seen this beloved country of ours so divided politically. In the past, we have seen divisions born from comments of agents, operatives of both parties. But the politicians, whilst they have chastised each other in this honorable House, their actions have never been as divisive as this present government. Madam Speaker, when you have the holders of the highest office of this land so bent on personal, institutional, and organizational victimization, what else do you expect from their agents, operatives, and colleagues? It is sad because these actions are dividing solutions rather than healing the nation after the results of June the 6th. Madam Speaker, I repeat, every single one on the opposite side are collectively responsible for allowing the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, the member for Meko South, to orchestrate and systematically build a better solution. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Honorable Prime Minister, Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs, Public Service, Leader of Government Business.
Madam Speaker, I ask that we suspend the House for 1 hour until 2 o'clock. 40 minutes? Until 1:45.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do stand suspended until 1:45 in the afternoon. I now put the question. As many are as of that opinion, say aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. This House is suspended until 1:45.
And this concludes the morning session of today's House of Assembly sitting. It is the 11th of May, 2017. We are on day 2 of the debate on the 2017 Appropriation Bill. We've had 2 speakers for the morning in the persons of the member for Schwazel Saltibus, Honorable Bradley Felix, and the member for Castries South, Honorable Dr. Ernest Hilaire, has just concluded his presentation. The House will break for about 40 minutes. They are to return at 1:45 p.m. And so we will see you there as the debate continues and as the day draws to a close. From the Government Information Service, I'm Alicia Ali, inviting you to stay tuned to the National Television Network.
I would like to or rather allow you to talk to all of you. We are all here.